heart of where innovation, money, and power collide in Silicon Valley and beyond. This is Bloomberg Technology with Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow.
Live from New York and Las Vegas, this is Bloomberg Technology. This hour, we sit down with OpenAI's Sarah Friar and Anthropic's Daniela Amodei, live at the Money 2020 conference in Las Vegas. Plus a deep dive into how Russia is continuing to access powerful Nvidia chips for a Mumbai pharma company. And Apple is planning a slew of announcements, plus its earnings this week. We push ahead to the Apple Intelligence rollout and its Mac overhaul. But first, we check out how Apple is helping push us higher on the NASDAQ. We are at or thereabouts record highs once again for this particular tech-heavy benchmark. All eyes on 0.6% higher, all eyes on the earnings that come out this week. Let's just dive into what we're expecting because they come thick and fast, friends. We've got the likes of course, Reddit coming as soon as tomorrow. We're going to have the juggernauts that is, of course, Alphabet, AMD on the chip side. We push aboard so many more names, the Metas, the Microsofts, the Amazons, and of course, the Apples. But first and foremost, we've got to be getting out to Las Vegas, where Ed is sat for a very special guest.
Welcome to our Bloomberg television and radio audiences around the world. We're live in Las Vegas. This is Money 2020, and we're joined by OpenAI's CFO, Sarah Friar. And this is interesting. You have some history with Money 2020, history with fintech, but that's kind of the point. And so much of the focus to date on OpenAI has been, I guess, a personal use of ChatGPT. But let's start with the banks and finance. How much of that is made up in your business?
Yes, thank you, Ed. It's so great to be here. And you're right, Money 2020, I've seen it progress through the years. What an incredible event it is today. And we're here because our customers are here. Right. AI is happening right now. It's not experimental. It's not something that people are just playing around with. Banks, financial institutions, fintechs, people are using it today in their business.
Well, there's the Morgan Stanley case study.
Yeah.
You know, this week alone or past week, Bank of America has talked about how many patents it's got in machine learning and artificial intelligence. But do you actually have a tangible sense of what it is those financial institutions are doing with your large language models?
Yes, absolutely. So Morgan Stanley is a great example. In their wealth management business, they're using our models both to help wealth advisors be more productive. They're using it as a way to create better financial advice and outcomes for customers. We're seeing folks like Klarna use it in customer service. The CEO of Klarna has been very loud and proud on this front. That's another great case study in terms of productivity improvements. And then we have banks like BBVA that are using it all across their business. And that's really our message here. It's just get started. Get enterprise ChatGPT rolled out to your organization. See what your people do with it. Help them just get started, whether they're in marketing, in finance, in product. Everyone can have really interesting use cases.
Even if we are just getting started, can you help our audience understand how meaningful a contribution the financial services sector, fintech, makes to OpenAI's revenue?
Yeah, so today if you look at our largest verticals, areas like EDU, education, healthcare, but financials is probably third. And again, I think that's because they are typically early adopters. They're often willing to take that risk because they see the upside in terms of driving more revenue, but they also are very good at managing their cost and efficiency. And it's great when you get an early adopter like Morgan Stanley because it tends to lead the way. I can't think of a wealth management client today that's not coming to us to say, what do we need to do? How do we get started?
Banks in particular can be sensitive to pricing. There's a lot of curiosity, not just in sort of as a consumer how much I'm paying on a monthly basis for ChatGPT access, but at the enterprise level as well. Reports are, for example, at the corporate per user level, you're thinking at about $2,000 per head. How are you managing us? Give us insight into the pricing strategy.
Sure, so pricing is super interesting because we're really trying to think about value and what is this person getting from this tool? And I actually don't think we've done a great job of that yet ourselves. Despite that, we have 250 million weekly active users, and of that, 5-6% have actually converted to be plus customers, so they're paying. But if you look at the value, when we were rolling out O1, our reasoning model, and this is a model that stops and thinks for you. It actually does hard problems. I was watching a lawyer in action using it to create a brief. And at the end, we said to him, what would you have paid for that? Like if you had a paralegal doing that, he was like easily $1,000 to $2,000 per hour. And this is someone who's using it, if it's an enterprise per seat, it's probably $60 per month. And this is someone who would have paid $1,000 to $2,000 per hour. So I think that there's a lot of value that is in the product today, but we are just trying to make sure people can get started, can actually see the outcomes, and over time we believe that value to price will come into alignment.
There's a balance, right, between what's of value to your customer, but also, you have to account for OpenAI's spending, which we talked about endlessly, particularly on the compute side. What is that balance in what works best for you and your customer base?
Yeah, so first and foremost, what's most important to us is to stay on the frontier. Building the frontier models, making sure that we are bringing, ultimately, AGI to the benefit of humanity. To do that, it's expensive. We have to invest in large-scale compute. And so to me, there's really two ways to finance that. It's either through the free cash flows of the business, spoken like a good CFO, or it's through raising equity and debt financing because investors can see the long-term potential of this business. So on the former, on the cash flows of the business, we want to make sure we keep growing that business. I think we have been wowed at just the pace of growth, particularly on the consumer side. It's about 75% of our business today. But even our enterprise businesses, they are young, but they are already doing an incredible amount of annualized revenue. And we're really excited by the potential there.
For our Bloomberg television and radio audience worldwide, we're in Las Vegas at Money 2020, and we're speaking to the OpenAI CFO, Sarah Friar, and you talked there about the consumer business. Something very interesting is the future business model, ad-supported tiers, for example, very specifically segmented pricing. How do you think about that, Sarah?
Yeah, so I think you always want to stay open to alternate business models or ways that you can layer a new business model on top. Now, the key for us is always access. How do we make sure as many people as possible get access to this tool? And that's on a global stage, by the way. And so to do that, sometimes you do pivot away from just pure subscription models to models like ads. My last company was all ads, so I've definitely experienced this. I think ads have their place, but you have to be really mindful of where. I think in areas like commerce, ads are great, right? If I do a ChatGPT prompt for black high-heeled shoes, something I probably would do. I actually don't want a history of the black high-heeled shoe. I want 5 stores I could buy from right now, probably e-commerce. So that's why companies like Shopify are great customers of ours as well. But there are other places where actually the ad model doesn't make as much sense. You want to get the consumer to the answer they need as fast as possible. And I think that's where ChatGPT is a really very different platform from, say, something like Google Search.
You are still relatively early in this role, but it's been 2 years since the original deal with Microsoft was negotiated, and that compute relationship is critically important.
Yes.
Will those terms change? Are they fluid, or are you just sticking to the contract that was on your desk when you arrived?
No, and it's actually longer than 2 years. Microsoft and OpenAI have been partners, I think, for actually almost 5 years. So they really came to us when we were a research lab. And the deal that we've worked with them is they do provide compute exclusively, and we give them the IP around artificial intelligence. So it's incredible. The products they're rolling out today are really built atop of OpenAI's AI. As we go forward and as we get bigger, we absolutely see a maturing in that relationship. And so for consumer benefit, we want to make sure consumers always get access to what they need. That will probably mean compute for more parties over time. We did discuss the Oracle deal, or Oracle discussed it a few quarters back. And I think that's a good starting point for just how do we maximize compute so we maximize the impact for consumers.
The catchphrase or buzzword of this year, I think, has been ship product, but you're the CFO, and so there's a tension between the cost of doing so and the need to move quickly. I think Sam has denied recently reports that the next model will be out by year end. What can you tell us about the path forward there, the cadence of new models to come?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. Ship product velocity, that is the mantra internally to OpenAI, and it's something I've just been so wowed by since I started, is just how fast we do ship products, right? Even in my short tenure, I've seen O1 come out, our reasoning model, that huge step forward from kind of what has been more the ChatGPT model series. We've launched things like advanced speech to the model itself. The O series, 4.0 and now 4.0 Mini. For example, 4.0 Mini, which is our distilled model, is 1/100th the cost of what the original ChatGPT 4 model was. That is incredible for developers, and that's why you see the API products be so successful. And again, it goes back to how do we get this into the hands of many? Developers are a force multiplier, and today I'm super proud. I think every single AI unicorn is built atop of OpenAI's API, and that will tell you how we are the frontier model.
I think when I started covering OpenAI, there was around 500 people at the company. It's probably nearer 2,000 now.
Yeah.
Part of that as the CFO is to keep talent, long-serving talent happy. My understanding is that tenders will be a big part of that, giving employees liquidity. What will be the cadence and sort of increments of that going forward, Sarah?
Yeah, so we are a company that has done tenders to date, and part of that is because we are in a competitive market, particularly for research talent. When I think about what keeps you on that front edge of the best models out there, it is compute, but more importantly, it's people. It's great researchers. And so in order to compete with companies that have liquidity already in their stock, public companies, we have taken this approach to tenders, a little bit like others in the space. SpaceX is a great example.
SpaceX is one we've covered closely, yes.
And so we want to be able to keep doing that. We want to do it thoughtfully and mindfully, knowing that the other rule one is to keep it on the field, make sure we have money for compute. So it's always a balance, but we do think it's important to give our researchers that access.
For our Bloomberg television and radio audience all around the globe, we're in Las Vegas and we're speaking to the OpenAI CFO, Sarah Friar. OpenAI is a software company, or it was. Now a lot of the focus is on Sam and the team's ambitions with safeguarding infrastructure. How involved are you in that, talking about the sort of construction of 5 gigawatt data centers and the financing of such things?
Yeah.
Was that a surprise to come in and sort of think, okay, I need to get a handle on that project?
Not a surprise, but definitely a stretch. It's new territory for me.
Stretch from a capital perspective?
Stretch from a capital and also just my own learning, frankly. I think we're all learning in this space. Infrastructure is destiny. It's this wonderful phrase that Chris Lehane has managed to get out there in the world. And we do think that this build is important. It's important for U.S. competitiveness. It's important for world productivity. It's important even with a national security lens. And so you are right. One of the key jobs I need to do is to figure out that capital allocation story. It's going to be both working with partners, it's going to be raising financing, but it's always making sure that we are staying ahead of what will be required, call it 2-3 years out, because you can't just turn on compute today if you need it. You actually have to have thought about it probably about 3 years ahead.
On that, if I may, one of the things I heard from some of your investors is you did a very good job early in explaining the basics of the plan, but the ultimate goal is AGI.
That's correct.
How confident do you feel you have that sort of infrastructure in place or a plan to have it for AGI?
I think we have the plan in place. I think if Sam were sitting on this seat, he would tell you AGI is closer than most think.
What would you say?
I would agree based on what I'm seeing. Like one of the best meetings I get to go to once in a while is the research meeting, and it would blow your mind to see what's already coming and what, as we have learned how to take reasoning models like O1 Preview on top of GPT models and the interplay between those, you're now really starting to see some incredible outcomes, PhD level outcomes, where you have in your pocket human intelligence that is PhD level in physics, in biology, in chemistry, in English literature, like whatever the job is you need to do. If you're a healthcare researcher, if you're a banker, if you're in education, the tool that you are now carrying, the power there, blows my mind.
Sarah, you touched on it a moment ago, financing, the need to raise capital. You've just done a pretty astonishing large round, but a follow-on. I mean, you must have a good sense of the cadence of needing to raise funds on an annual basis? I don't know how you plan it.
Yeah, so it goes back to what you said, which is really understanding in your plan, what are your big expenses? Compute is the biggest, but we also need to run a company. So we have real operating expenses. Right. We're right in the guts right now of FY25 planning. That is usually a 3-year outlook in most companies, and for us it needs to be because we have to make those compute decisions. And with that comes then, okay, what is our balance sheet going to look like? What's our cash burn rate? At what point can we generate enough free cash flow to actually fund the business? Not ready to tell you that today. Okay. That's for the next time we talk. And then on top of that, how do I help keep bringing our syndicate of investors along? I called them kind of with us.
We are less than a week from the election, and I think about my own use of 4.0. Mm-hmm. I've not used it related to the election, searching for information, but are you preparing for that election, and what impact might it have on OpenAI?
Yeah, we absolutely are. Like, we have to be very mindful from a safety perspective. Today, if you do searching around the election, you'll actually see that often we will not return a response, or we'll return with a caveat that says to be mindful of your sources. And I think I learned a lot of that, frankly, at Nextdoor, right? You cannot, need to be careful of not being paternalistic or maternalistic around people. People need to be able to find information, make their own educated decisions. But at the same time, you also need to be very aware when you have a platform that today services 250 million people every single week, we have to recognize that they're going to want to do things, and we need to provide avenues, but in a safe and secure way.
OpenAI CFO Sarah Friar here live in Las Vegas. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ed.
Good
that was
to catch up. Back to you.
Ed, we thank you. Coming up, Nvidia chips are still winding their way to sanctioned Russia. We discuss the alleged shipments of servers optimized for artificial intelligence via India. Meanwhile, we want to bring you some movement in Alphabet's shares, parent company of Google, of course. There is a report from The Information saying that Meta Platforms, of course, owner of Facebook and Instagram, is trying to keep pace with the likes of OpenAI in developing AI, but they're also looking at a search engine that is going to crawl the web to provide conversational answers about current events to people using Meta AI. Basically, they want to rely less on Bing and Google search. We're up 0.6%, but we did fade those rallies earlier on that headline. This is Bloomberg Technology. Quick check on Apple shares for you, because we know that they're showing us the latest Macs and the price points. We are seeing, of course, the iMac desktop, a new 24-inch. It's going to be faster, AI-focused M4 processor inside it, $1,299 price point. Same as the prior model, it's faster, and it has an enhanced neural engine, basically to help with those AI tasks. We're also, of course, getting updated to finally some access to Apple Intelligence, its first iteration anyway. We're currently higher by almost a percentage point. Meanwhile, we turn our attention to today's big take. It focuses on some trade tracking data, which shows that Indian pharma firm Shreya Life Sciences is selling top-end Dell servers optimized for artificial intelligence to Russia. Bloomberg's Victoria Dendrinu co-wrote the story, joining us now. So is this new that we're starting to see India as a way of accessing Nvidia chips for Russia, for example?
So I think the role of India has certainly come into focus for the West, so for Europe and the US. Over the past couple of years, they've been looking at various countries in Asia as transshipment hubs, where these goods can essentially come from subsidiaries, vendors, distributors, these goods primarily manufactured by Western companies and primarily US companies, actually. So the role of India is kind of, I guess the magnitude of the role of India as a hub has certainly become much greater over the last few months.
And why have they become such prominent actors in what is basically Russia trying to navigate barriers to accessing US tech?
So there's a lot of reasons. I mean, partly when we talk to officials in the US and Europe about it, one thing they point to is that India has been buying a lot of Russian oil, and Russia has a lot of rupees at its disposal. So it's been using these rupees it's been spending them essentially buying these goods out of India. So that's one part, a big part driving this increase of this trade. Another reason is also that, Western officials, the US and Europe, have put a lot of effort into cracking down on other transshipment hubs. For example, the earlier part of last year, there was a big focus in the UAE, Turkey, Central Asia, as areas where these goods were being sent to Russia. So I think a large part is the rupees that Russia has to spend, but another one is that they're cracking down, the West is cracking down on other areas where these goods were originally shipped from.
Now these Nvidia chips are in Dell servers known as PowerEdge XE9680s, and Dell has said, look, since ever the sanctions came into place, they've stopped shipments to Russia. But I'm interested in whether ultimately any of this is actually illegal.
Well, technically, it's not illegal in that India is not bound by U.S. or European sanctions. And in terms of the companies, I mean, it's true. A chip produced by a company in the U.S. I mean, its trade cycle, I guess, around the world it's impossibly difficult to track because you have vendors, distributors, subsidiaries, all these other kind of companies or people that take part in the trade route. So, in terms of legal responsibility, it's almost impossible to place that on someone, certainly in the U.S., who would be liable. But what could happen ex post is that, which has been happening, is that the U.S. could, for example, designate a lot of these companies, or a lot of these intermediaries around the world who do participate in the trade of these goods.
It's a fascinating deep dive into the role of this one particular pharmaceutical company in India and the shipments that it's currently making. Victoria, thank you for bringing it. Victoria Trendino. Time now for Talking Tech. First up, Hong Kong has outlined its first policy guidelines dedicated to the use of artificial intelligence in finance, and it's actually floated a tax break for crypto assets too. The Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, meanwhile, is also going to make a homegrown large language model available to the local financial services industry. Plus, Japan's Olympus, which manufactures and distributes medical precision machines and instruments, of course previously famed for its cameras, is pushed out its CEO less than 2 years after investigating an allegation he purchased illegal drugs. The company's shares, as you can see, was declining some 7% on Monday, the biggest intraday slide in almost 3 months. And Robinhood is joining competitors in allowing retail traders to bet on election outcomes before next week's US vote for president. The company is rolling out contracts pegged to specific events, including whether a particular candidate will win an election. This as Elon Musk appeared at a New York Trump rally yesterday, saying he could save the country $2 trillion. Take a listen.
How much do you think we can rip out of this wasted $6.5 trillion Harris-Biden budget?
Well, I think we can do at least $2 trillion.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde in New York. A quick check on these markets for you because we have been coasting higher to once again near those record highs for the Nasdaq. Nasdaq 100 still off of that high that we met back in July. We're still up 0.3%. All eyes on the huge amount of earnings coming out when it comes to big tech. Of course, tomorrow we anticipate the likes of Alphabet, of Reddit, of AMD, and then of course the Metas, the Apples throughout the rest of the week. Have a quick look on what's moving in terms of under the hood of the Nasdaq 100 right now. Looking though at what is a European name, also traded in terms of its ADRs here in the United States. Philips Electronics down by some 16%. It finished up trading down 17% in Europe. Why? Key lack of demand coming from China. It's weighing on GE Healthcare Technologies today. That's also off by some 3%. That company, of course, medical equipment, had already signaled they were seeing a lack of demand in the summer coming from China. But we look at Alphabet, still up 0.7%. It took a dip into negative territory earlier as the information reported that Meta AI might be trying to reduce its dependence on Google Search and Bing and instead build its own method of scraping the internet for current answers to Meta AI prompts, but now we're currently up 0.7%. All eyes on their earnings later in the week. But now let's return to the juggernaut that is Apple as well, helping lead the benchmarks higher today. It's got a week full of announcements as well as its earnings. Let's just go through what we've already heard today. Among the new products, we understand, of course, has been this new iMac starting at $1,299. It's coming with that M4 chip, all about, of course, AI there, an upgraded camera, Apple Intelligence as well, coming online as soon as today. Let's get to it with Anurag Rana. And we're all trying to work out at the moment, Anurag, how we're going to be using Apple Intelligence in our various Apple products. But how important are these announcements, particularly the Mac update?
Yeah, see, when you look at the Mac updates, I think its announcement is important from a tech point of view, just to showcase how good Apple is when it comes to the chip technology, how far it has come in the last 4 to 5 years. I think it's probably important from that more point of view than financial, because as you know, Mac account for less than 10% of total sales for Apple. So financially, not so much, but it's an important from a tech point of view.
What's also been grinding everyone is the hopes that Apple Intelligence will, of course, make us all use and depend on artificial intelligence that much more. But the fact that it's not coming until December for the operating system update really to make it useful for us. How much has that been an issue for you from a perspective on Apple as a buy?
Now, when you look at it from just a product refresh cycle, we think this is a good catalyst, but for the long run, which means over the next few years, we will see this basically force customers or consumers who have Apple products to go out and buy new things. I don't think it's going to have people rush out and get things over the next 6 months. And I think that's where our discussion is slightly different than what some of the other analysts are looking for, is an iPhone super cycle. We don't think that's going to happen this year. We think that could be more of a phenomena with the iPhone 17 launch.
Yeah, I love the title of your latest React. You go to the Bloomberg and manage to get it, the Bloomberg Intelligence, and it says the launch is a long-term driver for products. In the short term, there's some interesting news that's been broken around a key development of Apple being rolled out or not rolled out, it would seem, in certain countries. Can you talk to us about Malaysia and whether or not it's important that iPhones won't be accessible there?
So when you look at it, the launch of Apple Intelligence features, that will be staggered throughout. Now, as far as some of the emerging markets are concerned, those are really important end markets. And I saw the same news release as you saw, and there was some investment decision that Apple did not make that mark. But, I'm fairly confident over the next 12 months or so, Apple will take care of that from its end. But the biggest market, or the most important thing for us going into the quarter, is what's really happening in China. And I think that, people really forget how important that market is for Apple, and I think that's where some of the disappointment may be there.
So, and I correct myself, Indonesia is blocking Apple from selling its latest iPhones. This is more a quarrel about how much investment the company is making within Indonesia, feeling that not enough has been made. More broadly, how resolute is the emerging markets? How necessary is it for new markets to continue to evolve for Apple?
See, it's incredibly important. When you look at a market like the US, let's say the population size of 300 odd million, 350 million, somewhere around that, Indonesia is the same size. So longer term, as those countries become more richer or more affluent, they will be looking at Apple products in order to, be a big part of that ecosystem. So whether it's China, whether it's India, whether it's Brazil or Indonesia, all of these markets are extremely important for Apple.
Anurag, we thank you so much at Bloomberg Intelligence, breaking it down with the latest Apple announcements. We push ahead to its numbers, of course, coming to the market on Thursday. Meanwhile, coming up in the here and now, we're going back to Money 2020 to sit down with Anthropic President Daniela Amodei. That conversation up next, but first, let's just check in on a stock that continues to rally hard. We are looking at former President Donald Trump's social media startup, DJT, as it's known, or Trump Media. 5-week surge that's pushed the stock up by some 270%. It's up 19%, of course, unprofitable, worth about $9 billion. But this is after Trump held that very high-profile event in Madison Square Garden on Sunday. This is retail investors perhaps backing ahead of the all-important election next week. This is Bloomberg Technology.
This is Bloomberg Technology, and we're live in Las Vegas at Money 2020. It's really a fintech-focused conference, but AI is front and center, and we're joined right now by Anthropic President Daniela Amodei. And it's interesting, you have a background in fintech, pre-AI. Now you're in AI, and you're doing a lot of business with banks, financial services companies. One point of difference with Anthropic maybe is you really focus on the enterprise customer, and you did it early. But give me a sense of the split, how much business you're doing with the banks and other financial services groups.
Well, Ed, great to see you again. Thanks so much for having me on the program. So
Anthropic really has the opportunity to support enterprises really across a wide array of different industries. So healthcare, legal services, financial services have really all been early enterprise customers for us. And we really believe this is in large part because of our focus on really building for businesses. Financial services has always been a cornerstone pillar for Anthropic as we have really built and expanded the Claude models.
How are banks or investment firms using your large language models?
So much of what we've seen, especially over the course of the past year, is really these companies becoming more sophisticated about how they are integrating a tool like Claude. In particular, we're seeing many of these financial services and fintech companies using Claude for things like fraud detection, financial analysis, really partnering with their analysts on a wide array of different complex financial tasks. Customer support is also a use case that is really applicable across a wide array of financial services companies as well as administrative support. And so businesses like Jane Street, Bridgewater, Intuit, Stripe, and Coinbase are all customers that make use of Claude for many of the applications that I just mentioned.
Stripe, somewhere you used to work?
Something I know about.
Something known to you. What I understand from speaking to a lot of those that are either working in banking or in investment or asset management is you have the sort of data security component and then a regulatory component. Why is it that they trust you with both of those pieces?
So Anthropic has always had a very strong stance on trustworthiness, reliability, privacy, and security of the systems that we are developing. And something we feel very strongly about is that privacy of data is an incredibly critical component of companies feeling comfortable using generative AI. So we have never trained on customer data by default, and we have always worked to integrate closely with our partners at AWS and GCP on the security side as well.
In terms of regulation, there has been news in the past week, which is the UK's Competition and Markets Authority is looking at Google's partnership or investment in Anthropic. How are you working with the CMA to address their concerns?
So we are fully cooperating with the CMA to share all requested information. And fundamentally, Anthropic is an independent company. We operate in this new generative AI space and offer our models non-exclusively on our first party, via our consumer app, on Google GCP via Vertex, and also on Amazon Bedrock.
Daniela, I would say from a technology perspective, many are obsessed with agents at the moment, and your agentic tool is computer use. It's different. Why did you take that approach to basically having an agent that can look at what's on your screen, the actual hardware in front of you, and then engage with it?
We really feel, first of all, that this technology is an incredible sort of potential leap forward for what these models will eventually, we think, be able to do. And we've been very open that we think this is still in beta, right? We've very much sort of shared there's still limitations of the technology, but we felt it was really important to release it to our customers today because there's so much potential for computer use to really transform how people use a tool like Claude, right? You can imagine this much more complex assistant that is able to really partner with you either by taking, more complex actions on your computer or on the web. You can imagine this eventual virtual coworker really expanding what is humanly possible for people to achieve.
There is a great gathering here in Vegas of your customers. Some of them will be in the room later today, but also investors, people that are users of Claude and the various products you've shipped. How active are you in running the business of Anthropic right now, Daniela? Raising money yourself, managing the compute costs versus pricing on your enterprise products?
So Anthropic, like every company that is sort of operating in this space, requires a huge amount of compute to be able to really do the transformative research that we do. And so our researchers are constantly working to help optimize our compute and make sure that we're using the hardware as efficiently as possible.
The cost of a new model.
The cost of a new model, exactly. And we're really finding ways, in this sort of incredible research field to help optimize how we're using these models, coming up with new research innovations that are really driving the pace of the generative AI innovation in general.
Can we anticipate you raising more money?
as is the case, I'm sure you can imagine, we are always, looking to have conversations like that, but not actively fundraising right now.
Less talked about is Anthropic also has a unique company structure. Are you happy with that structure? Do you envisage it evolving over time?
So Anthropic is a public benefit corporation, and a little bit different, but pretty close. A public benefit corporation is actually a pretty well-established corporate entity. It's very similar to a C corporation. It is a form of C corporation, but it enables a company like Anthropic to be able to also prioritize its social impact mission in addition to all of the normal corporate activities that we engage in.
We are about a week away from an election in this country. How is Anthropic preparing for that? But also, do you have a sense of how customers, consumer customers or enterprise customers actually use some of the underlying models or tools they build on top of it in the context of the election? Maybe they don't.
So Anthropic recently released a blog post really detailing all of the work that we are doing on election integrity. This is a topic where Anthropic has really been an industry leader. We have been working on election integrity and anti-misinformation efforts for well over a year. And in the course of doing that work, we have partnered very, very closely with both other industry actors, but also civil society groups, really experts in this incredibly important area that we aim, again, to sort of be an industry leader in sort of setting the waterline for.
Anthropic President Daniela Amodei. We will talk later today in a longer conversation on stage. But for now, Caroline, back to you in New York.
Another brilliant conversation. We thank you, Ed. An Italian private equity outfit called Bending Spoons already owns popular apps like Evernotes and WeTransfer, and they could be coming for your favorite app next. As Bloomberg's Mark Bergen writes, Bending Spoons has a type: distressed businesses with a steady cash flow that sells subscription software. Mark Bergen joins us now. And you call it a new kind of private equity for the app generation. What is it that they're doing, Mark?
Their term is they said if private equity had a baby with Google. I think the idea here is it's sort of like this roll-up private equity that we've seen. We have Constellation Software, which is in Canada, that sort of rolls up these pretty successful software businesses that they may not be growing gangbusters, don't necessarily get an IPO, but they are kind of printing money. What Bending Spoon does is they hand them over to teams of new managers, researchers, engineers, and coders, and data scientists, and then they allocate resources depending on which one's doing well. And so you've seen them sort of buying up more prominent. Evernote was the most prominent one. WeTransfer recently. We reported that earlier this year they went after Vimeo, which is a public company. In our reporting in our story today, it looks like they're willing to spend upwards of $1 to $2 billion on acquisition. So I think it's a name that people are going to become more and more familiar with.
And Luca Ferrari, the guy in charge of it all, who's managed to get some celebrities to give him their money. What's interesting is you spoke with the former founder of Evernote, Phil Libon, who's now not part of the business, but he thinks some of the energy being put towards this business is perhaps a good thing, even if it means some job cuts.
Yeah, I was actually a bit surprised. We typically, there's obviously this sort of, when you start a company and you leave it and you kind of feel like this parent. And I mean, what was most striking to me, you started the story, Phil Libon, who ran Evernote for 8 years, had never heard of Bending Spoons when he was kind of come over and he was asked as a shareholder to sign away the company to this Italian app developer. He told me, 2 years in, he's been pleasantly surprised by the progress. He still uses it every day, sort of anecdotally. He sees people using the features more often. On the flip side, it's pretty easy to find. There's a lot more competition for Evernote. It was kind of pretty dominant at one point in that kind of note-taking apps. And there are people that have left because of the price increases. But the company makes the argument that they've actually made it better and that they're not like private equity where they sort of are trying to flip these assets, but they claim to buy these companies and sort of hold on to them for life.
And even referencing Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha, as perhaps someone that they see themselves akin to in terms of a business model. Mark Bergen, it's a brilliant story.
Don't we all, yeah.
It's all in Business Week. Go see it. We thank you, Mark. Meanwhile, let's just turn our attention to the German juggernaut that is Volkswagen. It's announcing plans to cut expenses in an effort to become even more competitive, but the automaker plans to close at least 3 factories in Germany, cut wages by 10%, and the plan could also lead to tens of thousands of job cuts in Europe's largest economy. Another car company also looking to cut costs here in the United States, Ford, currently trading up 2%. They're set to report their third quarter earnings after the bell. Stefan Nicola is with us from Berlin to really hone in on Volkswagen first and foremost. This is an EV story, a competition with China story, and an extraordinary move to be shutting factories.
Absolutely, this is a big move, and it really suggests that the golden years are over for this industrial juggernaut in Germany. Sales are slowing in Europe. The main VW brand that brought us iconic models like the Golf and the Beetle is struggling. It's struggling at home, but it's also struggling in China, where local manufacturers like BYD are taking over, and that is really a big problem, and management knows they need to make cuts.
What's also, of course, a weak point is not only their ability to penetrate China, but also a lack of demand at home in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. And the German economy, as we know, is stagnating, but car sales are down in Europe as a whole. The European car market is still a fifth below pre-pandemic levels. So it has never caught back up with the time before the pandemic, and that really means there's overcapacity. And at least 3 factories to be closed in Germany. While there's negotiations about that is still ongoing, of course, that is a big number, and it's leading to big headlines in Germany here.
What then of other automakers? We think of Mercedes-Benz, for example, really the refined side of automaking, German-based as well. How have they managed to navigate China or not, or at least the competition in EVs too?
Yeah, they're all struggling in China. All the Western car makers are struggling. Maybe Tesla is a small exception. But BMW, Porsche, Mercedes, they're all struggling because the market there is shifting rapidly to EVs. And the local customer seems to favor Chinese EVs at the moment. And we also have the problem that there is a luxury slowdown in China. We have the real estate crisis still. So people are holding off purchases. So that is just bad news in general for all these Western luxury car makers.
Look, there's a lot of pre-announcements to digest from Volkswagen, but we also are anticipating their numbers, their earnings, which aren't going to be pretty. We also sit here in the US eyeing what Ford is going to be telling us, and we're anticipating actually some decent growth from an earnings per share basis. But if I look at where the revenue is expected, going to be flat. Stefan, can you give us a taster of what to expect in some of these earnings?
Yeah, I mean, we've had several profit warnings over the past weeks and months from basically every major European car maker. And, the VW earnings, the Volkswagen earnings on Wednesday are not going to be good. We know that they're going to be reporting declining sales and profitability. That's already expected. The question is, what will they say about 2025? Is there a light at the end of the horizon? Will things improve? That's what investors will want to hear.
And indeed, German employees too. Stefan Nicola, we thank you so much, coming live from Berlin. Meanwhile, that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. You don't want to forget to check out our podcast, all those incredible conversations from OpenAI, of course, from the likes of Daniela, Amodei as well, and Anthropic. Don't miss it. This is Bloomberg Technology.